I think most of us are familiar with chapters and belong to chapters. If you don't, we won't ask you to raise up your hand, but we strongly encourage you to find the closest chapter. But in order for chapters to be formed, these are the requirements that are listed. And we wanted to provide them just as a primer to help everyone understand that it doesn't take too much to get a chapter started, but there are some key elements that over time we've discovered for chapters to be successful. At a minimum, 10 current ANIA members would need to place their signatures, and there's a form that's completed. And then identifying areas to serve. We try not to cannibalize our chapters by creating chapters in an area where there's already an established chapters, but we know in some cases there's overlap. And so we'll work with anyone who's interested in starting a chapter and identifying what members that are present in that particular area, and if there aren't any, really just identifying that new area. And then we know that leadership is extremely important, and so identifying 3 key board positions. You can have more, but at a minimum, ensuring that there's a president, a vice president, or president-elect is what some chapters opt for, and then a secretary/treasurer. We do know that in some cases, some chapters want to ensure that they have an online presence, so they may add a webmaster or an education chair. As long as there are 3 minimum board positions, members for those board positions, in some cases you can even combine those. And then the planning, the chapter in terms of your vision and mission, identifying any initial goals you may have, drafting bylaws, and there's a template for that. And then really determining the structure for your organization, whether you're registering with the state or you're going to go national, and then ensuring that you do have an employer identification number, EIN, that tax ID. And then once all of those documents are turned into a regional directors, typically, who the chapter or proposed chapter would work with, that would then be submitted. They may have some additional questions that would be submitted to the board. Once that's approved, the chapter is considered a provisional chapter at that point in time, and want to ensure that the chapter does have a bank account, just to ensure that checks don't have to be written to an individual but can be written to the chapter, and the requirements during the provisional year to move to an actual, should we call it fully approved chapter, would be ensuring that there's at least 1 business meeting for all members of that chapter, and then 2 educational meetings. And what most chapters do is they'll attach an educational meeting to the business meeting or vice versa to ensure that they meet that requirement. And then we know that a number of chapters understand the value of providing continuing education, and so it's not a requirement that those educational events have continuing education, but obviously it really helps with attendance. And then we know that based on the structure and how that chapter is registered, there's a need for turning in annual reports, whether it's at the state or national level, and at a minimum for ANIA, want to make sure that the chapters are also providing progress, and so there's an annual report due. So that's what it takes to start a chapter. If you're very interested and happen to live in an area where there isn't a chapter, definitely reach out to any one of us, and we'll be happy to talk further. And we're sure that by the end of this particular panel discussion, there'll be a whole lot more folks excited about their chapters and how to be successful.
This is how I came to a meeting in Philadelphia in 2015. That's how I got our Western PA chapter started from a conversation like this, and that's how I got interested in it. And so we're hoping if anyone is out there from Kentucky, so that they'll be available for next year. All right? That's just my little plug.
That's right.
Okay.
And we'll be supporting you.
Absolutely. All right. So the first question we have here for our panel, what was hard for you to get started, and how did you get through it? And, we have regional directors. That's just because we want to make sure that you know that you need to reach out to that person. So, Katie, you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So just like Kathleen, I also was sitting at one of these panels a few years ago and was inspired and was like, how can I get more involved? And that's actually how we started the South Florida chapter, was from that meeting. And I think the hardest part when we first got started was finding your people. As many of my panelists will probably also share, is sometimes you have a lot of turnover with your board members, and people's lives are busy, but if you just kind of keep forging forward and don't give up and keep showing up, you'll eventually find your group, and then you guys can run. And that doesn't mean that it's easy. We have definitely, with the South Florida chapter, struggled the last few years, especially with COVID, and we started to build a little bit of momentum, and then we kind of fizzled out. And it can be very intimidating when you're a new chapter, that you feel like, where do I go from here, and how do I find the people who want to help? And for me, it's coming to things like this, where you find like-minded people who are also sharing that same desire to get involved and want to do more with your chapter. So, I mean, now that we've been in our hometown for South Florida, it has been amazing. We've met so many local people who are excited to participate, but if we wouldn't have come here, we wouldn't have had that. And so really getting involved and finding the people in your area who are motivated to participate is kind of how we got through our hard times, because it was a year or so that we really didn't do a whole lot, and it was discouraging. And it's like, do we give up? And so we just kind of kept steady and not really doing a whole lot. But today I think we're on the path up, which we're really excited about. So South Florida.
How about you, Janice?
So I'm from the Midwest Regional Chapter, and we were one of the first regional chapters. We kind of had a drought in the Midwest with nothing in these 5 states of Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. There was no chapter around us. We had Ohio had a chapter, Michigan had a chapter, but there was nothing for us to join. So our first president, Lily, put out a request on the ANIA website saying, hey, anybody want to start a chapter here in the Midwest? And we're like, okay. So there were 6 of us that responded and said, okay, we're kind of interested. And we actually had people from all 5 states that responded, which was kind of lucky. And so we responded. The next thing we knew, it was hey, we have to have 10 signatures. Who do you know who might want to join? So each of us had a task to go out and tag at least 2 people to see if we could find 2 national ANIA members in our areas that would sign the petition list for us to become a chapter. So we got through that, and then it was, hey, we have to have officers. So those 6 of you who originally signed up to help, you can be president, you can be a vice president. Who wants to do secretary and who wants to do treasurer? It's like, okay, so we kind of all got assigned to do a job. And so we started meeting as a board in that preliminary state. None of us knew each other. We were total strangers, but we all had that common goal that we wanted to do something with our informatics career. We just weren't sure what to do to get off the ground with ANIA. So we worked really closely with Nicole Milheden, who was our regional director at that time, and she led us through all the steps and guided us to get what we needed. So every week or every month, as we would meet as a board, there was a new task that we needed to get through.